Hello and welcome to Dark and Stormy Book Club. We are taking a few weeks off to spend time with our families over the holidays, and during this time, we're going to be replaying a few of our favorite episodes from this year. And this first one is Joel Schwartz, who was the lawyer for Russ Faria in the case that was turned into a television blockbuster called What About Pam? Enjoy. Today we are absolutely thrilled to have a special guest with us. Joel Schwartz is an attorney, and he is the author of the book Bone Deep: Untangling the Twisted True Story of the Tragic Betsy Faria Murder Case. Enjoy. I'm Ann Dart.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you.
Bone Deep: Untangling the Twisted True Story of the Tragic Betsy Faria Murder Case is written by Charles Bosworth Jr. and Joel Schwartz. It was published February 22nd of this year by Citadel Press. On December 27, 2011, Russ Faria returned to his Troy, Missouri home after his weekly game night with friends to an unthinkable, grisly scene. His wife Betsy lay dead, a knife still lodged in her neck. She had been stabbed over 50 times. First responders concluded that Betsy was dead for hours when Russ discovered her. No blood was found implicating Russ, and surveillance video, receipts, and friends' testimony all supported his alibi. Yet, incredibly, police and the prosecuting attorney ignored the evidence. In their minds, Russ was guilty. But prominent defense attorney Joel Schwartz quickly recognized the real killer. The motive was clear. Days before her murder, the terminally ill Betsy replaced her husband with her friend Pamela Hupp as her life insurance beneficiary. Despite the prosecution's flimsy case and Hupp's transparent lies, Russ was convicted, leaving Hupp free to kill again. We are very pleased to welcome to the program Joel Schwartz. He is the co-author of the book Bone Deep, which goes into the Russ Faria and Pamela Hupp murder trial that has taken everyone by storm. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you very much for having me.
If I heard this story out in the wild, I would have thought this is the craziest story I've ever heard. And this just goes to show that truth is truly stranger than fiction.
Let me put it to you this way. When we had finished the book and it was in its transcript form, I had given it to two close relatives of mine who are very intelligent and very well read. And they both raved and they both loved it. And they both had the same comment that if it was fiction, they wouldn't have made it past page 100 because it was really, truly difficult to believe. It is stranger than fiction.
What is the status of Pam's case right now?
Pam's case is sitting in that limbo that most serious cases sit in, although hers is in a deeper limbo, if that's such a thing. And the reasons are twofold. Number one, the state is asking for the death penalty. Number two, she is currently serving a term of life imprisonment without parole. So there is no speedy trial issues for her. And number three, I'm very sad to say there was a public defender assigned to her case who works out of the death penalty office. And he suffered a tragic death about 2 or 3 months ago. So they have to start over with a different attorney.
Oh my goodness. And she was in jail when that happened, right?
Was she the last one to see him before he died?
Yeah, no, she was not, nor did she inherit any money from him. So it's safe to say she had nothing to do with this death.
I've been following this case for years, but I devoured the book when it came out. All the people seemed so over the top. Now, in the TV show, it's the same way. Do you think they're doing a good job of portraying you and the rest of the people?
First of all, let me state that they're not deviating from the truth, but what they've done is turned it into entertainment, and they turned it into a different mode that's been done before. So it's been successful as to what they wanted to do. People are talking about it, and I'm talking about the narration with Keith Morrison, who I think is wonderful. And they've kind of taken it from Pam's point of view, and they really did make it the thing about Pam. For example, last night's episode, it had the Pam on the marquee and Pam kind of running the show. Everything here is taken in a different light than my book. Now, both are accurate. The series takes a little bit of artistic license. The book does not do that. The book is entirely factual. But the book is more about me, and it's more about us. It really does not go from Pam's point of view. It just lays out facts, and anybody who has read the book or reads the book just has to realize that she is a character not likely to be encountered anywhere else in anyone's life.
I hope so. I really do.
Me too.
She's not getting out anyway, regardless.
She will never be a free woman. Whether or not a jury imposes a death penalty, it will be very interesting because the investigation, as you've learned, couldn't have been more deficient. So it amounted to simply taking the facts that I dug up and creating a circumstantial case against Pam. We all know beyond any doubt that she, at the very, very least, was involved. Whether or not she's the one who actually plunged the knife into Betsy, I don't know that we can say. However, if they get past that point and convict her of a murder first, which I think will happen, then all the information regarding Gumpenberger comes in, as does the information, at least arguably, regarding her mother's situation, which is another story in and of itself. And the Gumpenberger case will probably come in the case in chief merely because it shows what's called in the legal field as consciousness of guilt, in that she attempted to frame Russ a second time, as crazy as that is.
Unbelievable.
Do you think that there will ever be any legal action or suits against Leah Askey or McCarrick?
I can't answer that. I know the current prosecutor, Mike Wood, is looking into potential criminal charges against both of them. However, ethics violations are easy to prove. Proving criminal conduct is another leap because we don't know exactly what they knew and what they didn't know. McCarrick and Askey both clearly committed ethical violations. And I would argue that at least the police, some of the detectives involved in the case, committed criminal violations. And all I can say is what Mike Wood has stated publicly, and that is he's taking a hard, serious look at all the players involved, simply to demonstrate that nobody in Lincoln County or anywhere else is above the law.
For our listeners who do not know who Mike Wood is, he's the new DA, correct?
That is correct. And he is the one who brought these charges against Pam Hump.
What about Judge Menemeyer?
That's another story in and of itself. She was underwhelming. She just wasn't qualified to be sitting on a case of this nature, as demonstrated by her rulings. She won in a very, very narrow victory, and I've been told by several sources that she campaigned by going door to door with baked goods, which is crazy to elect a judge on that basis. She had never tried a criminal case as a prosecutor, where she was for a short time. She had never tried a criminal case or private practice. And this was, I believe, and I'm not certain, I believe her actual first criminal trial. And to say she got it wrong is quite the understatement of the year or of the decade.
Absolutely.
Well, she was connected to Leah Askey. They went to school together.
They were not the same year, especially after I started losing these ridiculous rulings. I tried to show a connection that I could utilize. I never could find a specific connection other than they went to the same high school. I did the same thing with Pam Hupp and Leah Askey because it's just inexplicable as to why nobody would at least take a step back. And I'm not saying charge the woman, I'm saying investigate her at the very least, and nobody ever would.
When I read the book, my first thought was if Russ was this criminal mastermind that they kept saying he was when he was taken in for questioning, if he was going to actually be the person to murder her, don't you think he would have made it look like a suicide and not stabbed her so many times?
What you're saying is 100% accurate. The person who would have done this, had Russ done it, he would have been smarter than to call in and say, my wife just killed herself, because there were 56 stab wounds, half of which were in her back. To think that the officers would just take her and put her in her clothes and not do some sort of autopsy is a sophomoric. Keep in mind, when Russ came in, what he knew at the time is he saw her wrist and marks across her arms and a knife in her neck. All of the stab wounds in her torso and her legs were covered by her clothing, which was dark, and you couldn't tell that there were stab wounds and you couldn't tell that there was blood. Although it was somewhat of an illogical conclusion, she had attempted suicide. She'd been involuntarily committed about a year prior. She had just been diagnosed with a terminal illness. She had been going through depression. So although, like I said, illogical, it wasn't just that far out of the realm of possibility to base charges on that and that alone. I'm not saying not to investigate the man, but what they did in their investigation within that 36 hours was virtually prove it would have been impossible for him to have committed this crime.
Oh, 100%.
What about the friends that he had in the role-playing game? Did they have a case against the prosecutors for defaming them, or is that legal?
Yes and no. It is legal, but she never would say it outside the context of the courtroom. If you recall, up until about a month ago, she would never grant any public interviews, giving the excuse, well, the case is still pending. Well, the case is on appeal. Well, now the civil suit's pending, so I can't comment on it. I wanted her to defend that accusation and say it publicly. If she would have done that, they could have sued her for slander. However, in the context of a courtroom, because it happened in that trial, she's immune from that, and there's nothing they could have done. And believe me, they wanted to.
They are victims too. That was the thing that also just got to me so much, is that how much her story changed almost by the hour. And why somebody didn't say, wait a minute, that's not what you said an hour ago.
You're close, but it wouldn't be an hour. Her story wouldn't change over the course of weeks or months or even hours. Her story at times would change within minutes. For example, did you go in the house? And this is 9 hours after the murder. Her first response was no. Remember that. It's hard to conflate with the truth. They're going there. There's two detectives. It's obviously very serious. They tell her friend is dead, and they asked her what time she dropped her off. And then, did you go in the house? And her first answer is no. It then immediately changed. Oh, well, I just went into the foyer to turn the lights on because it was dark. And then that story evolved over the course of the next half hour into, I went into the foyer, I turned the lights on, I went into the kitchen, I went into the bedroom, I stuck around, and I was with her for 20 to 30 minutes. And that's okay, fine. Her story changed. Why there wasn't one cool head in the room, one detective to step back and say, all right, I'm not sure I believe this guy's alibi. I'm not sure I believe all these people. They didn't have the cell site yet. They didn't have all the receipts quite yet. But why not? Let's take a look at this woman. She got the insurance money. Every time she opens her mouth, she tells a new lie. Nobody ever said that, or if they did, it fell on deaf ears. The only person who said it was me and my associate Nate, and then my 7th grade son.
I thought
Yeah.
that was great.
Yeah,
You spotted it right away.
I did, but that's like going outside at night and saying it's dark.
Yeah.
It was just patent on its face. It was just clear as to what was going on here. And I was so angered when I read through this. I couldn't believe it. And I will tell you, in all honesty, I thought once I got that discovery, I'd have him out in a matter of weeks because this would go away. You and I would never be talking. Russ and I wouldn't be talking 6 months later, much less 10 years later, because it was clear he didn't do it. When he got convicted after that first trial, I was truly beside myself. I was angered and I was determined.
I said to my partner here, if I'm ever convicted of murder, I want you on my side and I want Chris Hayes reporting.
Well, let's hope we never get to the point where you're
No.
convicted.
But I bet Russ never dreamed he would be in that position. And thank God you were there.
Well, thank you. And I know we're laughing and it's humorous as to how bad this investigation was. But the truth of the matter is, and it's frightening to assume, you go to work, you come home, you have your family, you have your friends, you do whatever. Russ was living his life. Russ was going through what people go through. He was struggling to make a living. He had a nice job as an IT professional. He would go every week to join his friends, like many men do. They go play golf, they go play poker. And he comes home and his wife is brutally murdered. And he is charged with it and couldn't have possibly done it. It's unfathomable to even try to put yourself in those shoes, because that's one of those things that we know is never going to happen to us until it does.
What about Mariah and Leah? Do they have a relationship with Russ?
The short answer is no, and it's sad, and it makes him sad. What happened is, during the course of the first trial, as is portrayed at least mildly throughout the course of the series, Leah Askey and Ryan McCarrick spent time with them, and they convinced not only them, but Betsy's mother, Janet, that nobody else could have done this, that this was a crime of passion, and this was a crime of rage. And there is not an intruder that would have done this. This is not something that a woman could have physically done, and Pam Hupp couldn't have done it because there was no rage. And so they convinced Mariah and Leah and Janet Meyer that it was Russ. And then they convinced him to testify against him, which they did. And that was heartbreaking for Russ. However, he understood why they did what they did. And to his credit, he was willing to reconcile with them because they were sending him letters. And once I got him out after the first trial, he wanted to meet with the daughters and they wanted to meet with him. And I was happy about that. However, they were still listed as witnesses. So I wanted to do it the right way. And I filed a motion with the court. And of course, Leah Askey objected extremely loudly and strenuously. And the second judge knew very little about the case. We were set for trial at that time. So the judge said, let's hold off. I don't want to get in a situation where he can be accused of tampering with a witness. Let them reunite after the second trial. What happened between that time and the second trial was Miss Askey started spending time with the daughters again, and she once again convinced them that they needed to testify against Russ. After they did that for a second time, Russ's position became, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice.
Shame on me.
I understand it. And given the civil suits and we sued the insurance company, Russ came into quite a nice sum of money after this was all concluded. So part of his belief now that they do want to reconcile, but they testified against him twice. And now he's got all this money. So he's just a little concerned as to what their motivations are. I can't say I blame him. I do think it's sad because these two daughters truly did lose their mother. They were deceived mightily as to their father's involvement, and then deceived and tricked into testifying against him. So now they have nobody, and I feel terrible for them.
I saw a brief interview on YouTube with them, and they do seem regretful their involvement, but I truly understand Russ's position in this. I think I would probably feel the same.
Yeah, he has moved on in life, and he is happy, and he tells everybody, the best revenge is to live a good life, and he's doing so.
Is he still with Carol McAfee?
That's a story in and of itself, isn't it? Talk about strange. For your listeners who don't know that story, Pam Hupp, in her second effort to frame Russ, literally went on a hunt for a human being, ultimately culminating in finding Louis Gumpenberger and shooting and killing him. The first individual she attempted to lure into the car through a babysitting gig and then changed it to this Dateline charade that she had come up with was a woman by the name of Carol Alford. After meeting in court and seeing one another out in a neighborhood where one of Russ's friends lived, they became acquainted with one another. They started to see one another, and they are now engaged to be married. So they are still together. They're engaged, and I don't recommend that as a way to meet women. But again, I don't know how else anyone in this story could have met other than that way, of course, because everything about this story is crazy.
Pam pretty much still says she's innocent, correct?
Absolutely. I think even though she pled guilty in the Gumpenberger case, she did what is called an Alford plea, where you plead guilty, but you agree with that, but don't say the word, I'm guilty. She may still be out there saying she didn't commit either one of them. She is that delusional.
I was talking before we got online here that I bet you she is holding court in the jail because of all this notoriety and just loves all the attention.
Have you ever seen but it was turned into a movie, but it was a Broadway play, Chicago?
Oh,
Yeah.
She's Roxy.
Oh,
She-
definitely.
She is the big deal in the jail. And that's exactly what it reminds me of. I'm sure there was another big deal until Pam came along and Pam took over.
Yep. Yep. So, well, I know the book, we get all the information at once, but the case took years to become,
Manifesting.
I hate to say,
I'm
it, the shit show that it became.
I met Russ in January of 2012. He was convicted the first time in November of 2013. And given the machinations of what we went through on the appeal, it came back so fast, faster than any appeal I've ever heard of, not just dealt with. But by November of 15, we were in trial and he was acquitted. And then we had our civil settlement a couple of years later, along with the insurance settlement. And it's crazy. It's still going on. And this saga is going to continue. I would guess she goes to trial sometime in 24.
Oh, really?
Wow.
And that's not even discussing what we already broached about her mother. I don't know what's going to happen with that. Again, circumstantially, I think we all know what happened. I just don't know if there's enough for the current St. Louis County prosecutor to bring charges.
You have to wonder, based on what I've listened to and learned, she had a pretty normal childhood. How do you go from that to
Serial killer.
The only thing I can answer is money. Greed does strange things to people. You could make an argument that the traveling injury from her drop foot to her spine to her vertebrae and neck to her head, it always changes to fit her purpose. But maybe there is something to it, and maybe that changed her brain chemistry. I'm not trying to give her excuses. She's a evil, diabolical human being. And I don't know. She was a cheerleader, a pom-pom girl in high school. For lack of a better term, there are several screws loose in that head.
I have
Yeah.
one more question for you, and that is, do you think that her husband knew any of this was going on, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I believe that it would have been impossible not to have known something. I don't know because he was not investigated, nor were other members of her family investigated. There were certainly phone calls and things done that would have merited an investigation. It would be irresponsible, and it would be doing the same thing that whether or not she was in the house plunging that knife into Betsy, or whether her job was simply to make sure she got Betsy back locked to make sure nobody was home and stood as a lookout. I have suspicions as to whom that may have been. However, it just would be irresponsible to make an accusation without having more. When she killed Louis Gumpenberger, the argument there was bolstered. Back to the people who read the story, they can make their own conclusions. In my opinion, was there help? Yes. But to say that, I don't know for sure, and I don't know who.
I think the TV show is doing a good job of just kind of alluding to it when he says something like, well, did you take care of something? Kind of leaving it up to the viewer, whether he had an involvement or not.
I agree with that. I'm enjoying it, and I think Josh Duhamel is doing a great job. We've become friends, and he has my mannerisms down, but there's such limited time with commercials to show this show and to try to paint this picture. It's such a massive, massive journey. It's so difficult to encapsulate in these short episodes. If an iceberg is 100%, talk about the tip. This is just getting maybe 3 to 5% of what happened. Get the gist of it, and people are very frustrated. Today, after watching the episode last night, so many people are saying, how did you maintain your cool? How did you not get tossed in jail or have a heart attack? And I thought I was going to get tossed in jail. I thought she was going to hold me in contempt because I went way further than Josh went in the episode. Again, this just scratches the surface of what Russ and I and Nate had to go through in this case.
I can't even imagine the hours and the frustration. It's just crazy. Joel, we really appreciate all your time with us today. And please make us a promise. If anything else happens with this, will you agree to come back?
Oh, I would be honored and privileged to come back. I would love it. I've enjoyed speaking with you. And if I may quickly promote my book, it's called Bone Deep, Untangling the Betsy Faria Murder. And we are getting 5-star reviews and people who thought they knew the story and said, do I need to read this? I know everything. They read the story and then they come back to me with a half hour worth of questions. So I'm honored by that. And I hope everybody enjoys it. And I hope you guys have enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed spending my time with you.
I will tell you this, the book was over 400 pages and I work a full-time job and I read it in 2 days.
Wow. Well, thank you.
Could
I'm
not
glad you
put
enjoyed
it
it.
down.
It was amazing. Would you do us a favor and give Russ our regards? And we wish him and Carol much happiness. They deserve it. They've been through a lot.
And we wish you all the happiness too.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you again for having me.
And you enjoy the rest of your evening.
I will do my best. All right. Have a nice night. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Well, that brings us to the end of another program. We thank Joel for taking time to visit with us, and we certainly would suggest, if you get a chance, watch the series all about Pam. You will not be sorry. It is a fascinating story, and read the book, Bone Deep. And remember,
Life would be boring without a little mystery. Bye.